me. Seems like everywhere I go I see you. From your eyes, your smile, it's like I breathe you. Helplessly I reminisce, don't want to compare nobody to you. Boy, I try to catch myself, but I'm out of control. Your sexiness is so appealing, I can't let it go. Know that I can't get over you, 'cause everything I see is...
Okay then, I guess I'll pick back up at work where the next life-changing event would take place. It has been nearly 6 months since my trip to Key West. So there I am, now doing the whole morning production meetings and such. I was given my own little cubicle in an entirely different room, far from the benches I once found myself. They'd given me a computer, put me on salary, and I now officially had people working under me. Some might consider all this something to be proud of, but to be completely honest, I really had worked myself out of a job. Granted, I went in the opposite direction and moved up rather than getting laid off, but now I was no longer on the bench doing hands-on work, and as a result, I was now so fucking bored. What's that saying? Idle hands are the devil's playground? I just think it's funny. The higher up you go, the less work you do, and now I had my own private cubicle complete with internet access. On the wall next to my monitor were several pictures, some of Heather, some of Bettina, and a lot of my car. Then off to the side a little further, all by itself, was the last sunset picture that Bettina took before we left Key West. It was a constant reminder of my deceitful exploits. There were definitely things I would have otherwise been too scared to look up on the net at home, where Bettina was now practically living. She was always on my computer, and she was a snooper, so I kind of refrained from surfing certain things because she would have easily found my visited sites. Or at least that's the excuse I often gave myself for the delaying of this particular digital inquiry time and again. Then one day, while sitting alone at work, something in me just triggered. I'd always been curious about what was truly involved in getting a sex change, so maybe it was a good thing after all that I was now privately secluded, because I finally did it. I googled sex change. And to my surprise, the first sites to pop up were not porn sites, but informational treasure troves, also very far from what I was expecting to find. The first was Lynn Conway's TS Success page. The second was Andrea James' TS Roadmap, and the third, though I can't outright say because it was someone's chronicle of her change, considering how much of an inspiration it was to me, I'll simply refer to site number 3 as the diary. So there I was with this wealth of information at my fingertips, and all the time in the world to read away in privacy. TS Roadmap is basically a site, just as its name implies, kinda like a sex change for dummies. It lists all the things one must go through, what to expect, and how to deal with the transition. It talks about the Harry Benjamin Standards of Care, or HBSOC, which is a format that each and every transgendered person must follow in order to complete their change. Some in the community disagree with it, but now viewing it in hindsight, I can at least understand its purpose. Basically, the HBSOC says that you must be in therapy and living in your desired gender for a full year before you're able to get your SRS letter, SRS being sexual reassignment surgery. And while most consider the final letter to be a validation, those who are short on cash and can't afford the additional therapy sessions often disagree with being forced to pay the money while also trying to save up to $15,000 plus for the surgery. Also in the HBSOC is a timeline of expected events. Things like at the 3-month mark, you're allowed to start hormones. It's designed to give the impression that care is being taken in diagnosing someone with GID, or gender identity dysphoria. And from the USA all the way to Thailand, no surgeon will even come near you with a sharp object without that final letter stating that you've done what is needed to prove that this is the only cure for you. In a way, it is protecting the community, because if someone has non-gendered issues and cuts something off which doesn't grow back, but later decides they made a mistake, the doctors just don't want to be responsible, nor does the community wish to be barred from following through with their own transitions once the government deems getting a sex change too risky to allow. The next site was the TS Success page. This was basically a collection of pictures and stories from those who had successfully transitioned and were now sharing their experiences with the world. It's filled with various articles and some other reiterated information, and it was through it that I found the diary of a girl not too far from my own age, very beautiful, very energetic, and very similar to how I viewed myself. It took me almost a full week to read through her journal from beginning to end, and when I finished, so much of my own life was finally brought to light. She even had a little timeline of her transition containing everything from her coming out to some of her life afterwards, and I instantly found myself engrossed in her story. For the very first time, I was clear on what was wrong with me. I rather enjoyed my Key West experiments, but in all honesty, I didn't really care for the parts where the guys returned the flavor. I liked touching, but not being touched, or at least not down there. I did enjoy girls, but even having them down there was a mental hassle. I knew I wasn't gay, but I also wasn't sure if I was straight. I just knew the problem had something to do with me, but I didn't quite know what that problem was, or at least until now. Shortly after I finished reading the diary, I did some more web searches on GLBT, gay, bi, lesbian, trans, therapy centers, and found one close by. I immediately got myself a therapist. Her name was Sue, and within that same week, I also joined an online gender forum in which I was to chronicle my entire change. All the information I needed was now before me, printed out and read 1,000 times. My goal was to use the diary as my own personal guideline. However, I wanted to one-up it and get this over within a year flat. From my first week in therapy to getting the SRS letter a year later, this was now my project. I had the cash and the drive to get this done, and there were no doubts that this was the cause of my internal blight. So many things have been clarified, and I no longer felt I was weird in my actions. I even learned a few things along the way, such as two simple words, which are often written into confusion: sexual orientation and sexual preference. Aside from all the obvious terms and labels already known to the world via outlets such as the Discovery Channel and the occasional talk show, I found that as I went through my transition, it was these two new terms which often confuse people the most. Sexual preference is who you like to sleep with. Do you like men, or do you like women? Or if you're like me, do you like both? Sexual preference refers to being gay, lesbian, or bisexual, though in my case, I like to refer to myself as trisexual, simply because I like to try everything possible. But again, that's just me. The opposing term is sexual orientation, and this is the one I found people having a hard time grasping for some reason. Sexual orientation is simply who you see when you look in the mirror and has nothing whatsoever to do with who you like to have sex with. It's just your personal view on how you orient yourself. Perhaps it's still a new concept, and that's why people aren't too familiar with it yet, but there it is. As I used to tell people, just because you might be Italian doesn't mean you have to like pasta. One thing I always found amusing, once you start transitioning and people begin finding out, there's always going to be certain questions that you're bound to get asked. So you're really going to cut it off? So when you finish changing, are you going to be with girls or guys? So if you're going to stay with girls, then why don't you stay a guy? Or, if you're going to be with guys afterwards, then aren't you gay? This is where all that sexual orientation talk has to come in. At the time, I was still with Bettina, and considering all of my lesbian fantasies throughout my life, my answer to that question always leaned towards the whole being a lesbian thing, though I can't help but laugh as I write this now, reading how that sounds. Hey, when I grow up, I'm gonna be a lesbian. Yeah, right, as if you can choose. Ask me now, and I can't stand women. They're all overly emotional bitches. Sure, they're hot and sexual beings, great for emotional bonds, but to date a girl as a girl is near impossible these days, as every woman always seems to have her own agenda, whereas dating a guy is just a whole lot simpler. In the end, regardless of who or what you may think you're gonna do after transition, you'll never know for certain until it's all complete and you've had a chance to live in your new role. Until then, here's a grain of salt. Take it with pride. So I got accepted into therapy for transgender issues and was beginning my weekly sessions with the intent of getting my SRS letter in 1 year's time. I absolutely loved my therapist. There wasn't anything I couldn't talk with her about. She knew what I was going through and where I was headed long before I ever realized it. She gave me advice when I needed it and yelled at me when I deserved it. I'm very thankful for every lesson I learned from her, and for the next year plus, Sue is going to be my mentor. My goal was to give therapy a full and honest week before making it publicly official, and towards the end of that first week, I indeed was ready to make my first major change, something I'd wanted to do for a very long time, but simply couldn't without drawing a lot of attention. I wanted to shave my legs. I've always hated the way they looked with all that hair on them, even on my ass. I once mooned one of my friends while they were taking a picture and was beyond disgusted by the results. The only problem I was facing with shaving the entire lower half of my body was doing so while having a girlfriend. It wasn't going to go unnoticed. So later that day, just after therapy, I decided to call someone I hadn't talked to in a very long time, Heather. She happened to live in the same town that my therapist practiced out of, so I gave her a ring and told her that there was something really important which I needed to talk to her about, figuring she'd be a safe bet, considering she didn't know Bettina, no longer talked to my parents, and couldn't directly affect my personal life. Furthermore, she was also studying to be a psychiatrist, and with all the time we'd spent together, I figured she'd at least be able to understand. I guess I just needed some further assurance before making such a bold decision, so I told her I'd take her out to dinner because of the nature of what needed to be said. She accepted, and when we got there, I laid it on her. She wasn't too surprised and said it explained a lot of things, a reaction I'd become all too familiar with as I slowly came out to everyone else. Nonetheless, she said she wished me luck and supported my decision. It wasn't a long get-together and certainly wouldn't be our last. So now it was time to tell Bettina. Later that night around shower time, seeing as how we always showered together anyway, I figured that'd be the best time to drop the bomb. So there we were, we just got naked. But before she stepped in, I looked to her and complained that I was sick of the hair on my ass and legs. She then laughed and foolishly asked, "So what are you going to do about it?" So I responded, "I want to shave them." Her response,
"That'd be so gay."
Though we laughed it off, I was actually pretty crushed. At least I was always able to get away with saying such fucked up things, because that's who I was. No one ever really took me seriously. The following day I thought long and hard about what Bettina had said to me, but all I had to do was go back online and glance over the diary to again be reassured that this was something that I was going to do, with or without Bettina, the support of my family, or anyone else who might stand in my way. So at shower time the next night, just as we got undressed, I told her to wait. There's something I need to tell you. I finally admitted to being in therapy for gender dysphoria and that I had every intention of going through with a sex change. Then I handed her the razor and told her to shave my legs for me, and that if she didn't like it, we weren't going to work out. She reluctantly helped me clear the areas I couldn't reach, and even taught me how to do it without cutting myself.